Alina here, and with the help of my friends Senia and Grace, we'll be showing you how sounds like this move through your ears and up to your brain for processing. Let's start out with a little anatomy. You may have heard that you have an outer, middle, and inner ear. Sounds move through your auditory system, usually in that order, to get translated from pressure variations into a language that our brains communicate in, electricity, in the form of neural impulses. These structures play a game of telephone with the sound, passing it along and changing it slightly at each station. The first stop is the outer ear. We talked in our first video about how your vocal tract shapes the waves that are generated by your vocal folds to make speech sounds come out. These sounds are shaped as they come out of your mouth. But your outer ear, the pinna in your ear canal, shape sounds that are coming in. The pinna and its ridges shape very high frequency sounds so that they're a little different coming in from every direction. We don't really perceive these minute changes in sound, we just hear them as changes in location. Now the bowl-shaped area here and the canal that goes in boost up important sounds for hearing speech. Well, what happens next? Next, that tailored sound gets to the middle here, which is really just your eardrum and three small bones that work like a lever system. When pressure changes, sound waves get to the eardrum, it vibrates along with them, picking up the waveform. These vibrations get passed along the chain of bones, and when they get to the end, the lever action and the difference in area from the big eardrum to the tiny end of that bone makes the vibrations bigger. This is good because your inner ear, the next stop in the process, is filled with fluid, and it's a lot harder to move fluid than air. Now we're at the inner ear. This is where the action is. We've seen how sound vibrations get made, changed, and transferred to the inner ear. But at this point, there's still vibrations, and there's still one big wave, like the time waveform that we saw earlier. The inner ear, specifically the cochlea, is where this movement gets separated out and picked up by the auditory nerve, which passes it up to the brain. In real life, the cochlea looks like a snail shell, but we like to think of it as a sleeping bag. You'll see why.
Inside the cochlea, there are fluids that are positively and negatively charged, separated by sheets of tissue or membranes. These fluids set up a battery situation that allows the vibrations to be turned into electrical impulses.
Complex chemical reaction, blah, blah, blah. What you really need to know is how the sound waves get broken apart. To understand that, let's unroll the sleeping bag. Okay, one of the most important parts to this frequency analysis of the waveform is the basilar membrane. It moves kind of like this and separates out the individual frequencies in a sound. We also have two sets of motion detectors that sit on that membrane. One set alters the movement, so it's more accurate and efficient. The other set picks up the movement and translates it into neural impulses in the auditory nerve. Let's go back and get into a little bit more detail about the basilar membrane. In real life, it's a small, thin piece of tissue that's narrower and stiffer at one end, and then gets gradually wider and floppier at the other. Stiff, narrow things vibrate quickly, and wide, floppy ones vibrate more slowly. It's that simple. This area likes to vibrate quickly, so it will pick up the high frequency sounds. This area likes to vibrate slowly, so low frequency sounds make it move up and down. The basilar membrane turns this waveform into this spectrum. Now you may notice that the harmonics in this sound aren't evenly spaced like they were in the spectra that I showed you in the last video. Well, if you look at the frequencies, they still are evenly spaced. The way our ears deal with frequency is crazy cool. Humans can hear about 20 hertz all the way up to 20,000 hertz. And we have to fit all of them onto the basilar membrane.
Now wait a minute. You may remember that harmonics are always multiples of the fundamental frequency they're connected to and by. 100, 200, 300, you get it. But some musicians may know that the sounds we perceive as the same note in higher and higher octaves are actually doublings of frequency. 100, 200, 400, you get it. Well, the basilar membrane is laid out that second way, in doublings.
That's why the harmonics look closer together up here than they do down here. And that's how we fit all 20,000 hertz onto the basilar membrane. I mentioned earlier a set of motion detectors that refine the movement of the basilar membrane. They are the outer hair cells, and they dance. They're actually laid out in rows along the basilar membrane, each one at a specific place, and it likes to dance to a certain beat. When these hair cells feel vibrations at their favorite frequency, they change shape and actually push into the basilar membrane for low-level sounds. These little guys give the motion at their favorite place and favorite frequency a more pronounced peak. As you can see in Senia's drawing, that peak is also at a slightly different place. Long story short, these guys tune and amplify low-level sounds so that we can hear a wide range of sound levels and very specific frequencies. Now the last stop on the way to the auditory nerve and up to the brain is the inner hair cells. They detect the motion of the basilar membrane and release chemicals that cause the auditory nerve to fire. Let's look at the spectrum of my ooh to see how this works.
Ooh. Up until these peaks start to get too close together, each and every peak shows us where the basilar membrane is vibrating that much, that many times per second. Here, it's moving up and down about 275 times a second. When the pressure is high, the cell releases its chemicals and causes firing in the auditory nerve, 275 times per second.
Now there are a couple of missing pieces here. First of all, the cells can only release their chemicals so quickly, about 4,000 to 5,000 times per second in fact. That's why the notes on a piano, or a piccolo, or any other high instrument do not go above about 4,000 hertz fundamental frequency. Above that, we can't hear a clear pitch anyway. So what would be the point? The hair cells can't lock on as precisely up there. Also, the auditory nerve isn't just one big cable, sorry Grace. It has many different fibers attached to each inner hair cell. Some respond to low-level sounds, and others only to high-level sounds. More basilar membrane movement from higher-level sounds means that all the fibers at that place can fire. Thank you, that is all. Now that we understand what happens to a sound as it comes through our ears, the important anatomical structures, and what they can and can't do, we can move on to what our system as a whole can and can't do, and why. Our next video gets to the root of these mysteries by explaining how we code sound and what happens to a singer when one of those codes gets cracked.